Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good weekend so far and welcome back to A Gnome Abroad, where today we're going to be visiting sunny Sicily, located just off the toe of Italy's boot. That's Italy, over there on the left. And up ahead of us is Sicily itself. Sicily kind of has the same relationship with Italy as Crete has with Greece. Technically, Crete is part of Greece. But anyone from Crete would say that they were a Cretan first and a Greek second. And it's the same with Sicily. They're very definitely Sicilians first and Italians second. Sicily, of course, is where the Mafia come from, La Cosa Nostra. Interestingly, during World War II, Mussolini's fascists had pretty much crushed the Mafia as any kind of organised criminal activity. They pretty much had to go underground. Then 1943 happened, the Allies invaded and took over and found that there was a bit of a power vacuum in the areas that had just come under Allied control. Obviously, they didn't want everything to remain administered by the fascists who'd just been conquered. So they were having a bit of an administrative and logistical nightmare, which wasn't helped by the massive humanitarian disaster that had befallen the people of Sicily in the wake of the destruction and devastation caused by the invasion and capture of the island. So the Allies were looking for locals, fine upstanding pillars of the community who could step forward and help them organise all of the shit that needed to get organised. You'll never guess who stepped forward. Yep, the Mafia. They didn't introduce themselves as the Mafia, of course. They certainly appeared to be respected members of the community because when they said jump, the local Sicilians said how high. So the US Army basically put the Mafia in charge of organising the millions and millions of tons of supplies, fuel, food, uniforms, vehicles, you name it. And the Mafia got shit done. Of course they did. They're called organised crime for a reason. They skimmed millions off the top for themselves, of course. And, well, they went from being marginalised and crushed into obscurity under Mussolini to, well, where they are today under the Allies. We're approaching the northern end of the Straits of Messina. That's the city of Messina itself, just underneath the aircraft there on screen. This is one of, if not the narrowest and busiest shipping channels in the world. At its narrowest point, it's only 1.9 miles wide, and it has extremely strong tidal currents that even go so far as to create a natural whirlpool in the northern portion of the strait. This is a treacherous channel to navigate, and it's an utter nightmare if you're in a warship. I've been through the Straits of Messina way too many times. Long before you approach, the ship has to close down into what we call Condition Yankee. Condition Yankee is one of three watertight conditions, any one of which will be in force on board at any given time. X-ray, Yankee, and Zulu. If you're in Condition Zulu, every single watertight door on board the ship is shut, and this usually only happens at action stations. If you're in Condition X-ray, that's normal cruising stations. Most watertight doors, hatches, are open. But if there's increased navigational hazards, like when you're going through the Straits of Messina, for example, the ship will assume a heightened watertight integrity state, Condition Yankee. And if you're extremely unlucky, and I usually was, you get pegged for what's known as Yankee Patrol. There are usually two Yankee Patrols on a ship the size of a frigate or a destroyer. One forward and one aft. Each patrol consists of 2 people. And upon going into watertight Condition Yankee, the Yankee patrols have to go around and shut every hatch, valve, door, anything that's marked with a red letter Y painted on it. These are your Yankee doors and hatches. This process will usually take, depending on the ship, around about 20 minutes to complete, upon which you report to HQ1 that the ship is in Yankee. Now, that doesn't sound too bad. 20 minutes, that's nothing. Well, yeah, but then every 10 to 15 minutes you have to do a Yankee patrol. That's why you're called Yankee patrols. You have to patrol either the forward, if you're the forward Yankee patrol, or the aft, if you're the aft Yankee patrol area of the ship, checking that every single one of those Yankee doors, hatches, valves, stopcocks, whatever, is still shut. And you do that every 10 or 15 minutes for as long as the ship is in condition Yankee. And when you're approaching and transiting the Straits of Messina, you'll probably be in condition Yankee for 12 hours. So much fun. And of course, this is an additional duty on top of what you normally have to do for your job during the day. And while you're doing Yankee Patrol, nobody else is doing your job. So when you finish Yankee Patrol, in my case, that meant I had a lot of work to catch up on. Oh, yeah. Join the Navy, they said. See the world, they said. It's a man's life, they said. Yeah, being in the Navy isn't all beer and skittles. Sometimes you do actually have to work for a living. Now, the Straits of Messina are definitely busy today, but they were even busier in August 1943. It's been referred to as Germany's Dunkirk, the evacuating Germans pulling their forces back from the defence of Sicily to the Italian mainland. Starting on the 11th of August 1943, over a period of 6 days and 7 nights, they managed to evacuate 39,500 soldiers, 47 tanks, 94 heavy guns, 9,600 vehicles and more than 2,000 tons of ammunition to the Italian mainland. And that's without taking into account the 60,000 Italian troops who were also evacuated. Now, it certainly didn't help that the German 29th Panzer Grenadier Division and the 14th Panzer Corps had been brought over from Africa for the express purpose of slowing the Allied advance to Messina down and allowing Field Marshal Kesselring to evacuate most of his forces. But when you see the terrain that they had to fight over, let's just say, while the British did have a reputation for being solid in defence, you could have learned a thing or two from the Germans as well. And when you see the terrain that they withdrew over, you'll understand why their rearguard actions were so successful. Because basically, Sicily is a whole bunch of mountains. Take a look at the ground down below. You see the ridgelines of all of those mountains. Have you noticed how they run across the Allied line of advance? Which basically means that Allied forces advancing towards Messina had to fight their way up one side of the mountain and then down the other side of the mountain. Yeah. And you couldn't drive water, fuel, ammunition, food supplies up those mountains because they're mountains. So this was an infantry job, and they carried their supplies with them or brought them up in mule trains. And they had to fight their way up over the ridges of these mountains because at the top of every mountain in Sicily is a tiny little Sicilian walled village. Why on earth is every mountaintop village in Sicily a walled fortress? Well, that's because the Sicilians learnt their lesson from the hundreds and thousands of years that people have been fighting over Sicily. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Venetians, the Romans, you name it. Pretty much everybody has either conquered Sicily at some point, or they've had a damn good try. And so the Sicilians pretty quickly learned that if they wanted to survive everybody fighting over their island, they built their villages on the tops of mountains and they put bloody strong walls around them. And even on those rare occasions where the ridgelines of the mountains paralleled the line of advance, you were no better off in the valleys, because on those mountain tops were German observers and artillery and anti-tank guns. And there were no real roads in Sicily either, not in 1943, and any that were had been mined or blown by the retreating Germans. So the massive advantage that the Allies had in tanks and mechanised equipment, well, it's not much of an advantage if you're trying to drive tanks up a goat trail, because one anti-tank gun can stop the entire column. So while the terrain definitely favoured the defender, and the Germans made excellent use of it, it was no picnic for the Germans either, because they were basically on the bones of their arse without a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, and they did not have control of the air. And the second a German artillery piece or anti-tank gun or observation post was spotted, it would get pounced on by dozens of fighter bombers. So those few Germans who were committed to the rearguard actions, allowing the bulk of the armies to escape through the Straits of Messina, they went through an utter nightmare of rearguard action after rearguard action, digging in at a defensive choke point, harassing oncoming Allied troops, weathering the bombing from the air, and then as soon as it got dark, picking up all of their gear, retreating a mile, maybe 2 miles down the road, setting up another position, and doing it all again, day after day after day, with no sleep, precious little ammunition, and very little food or water. Now, having to fight continuously for 5 days with no sleep isn't great, but it was the lack of water that tortured the German rearguards more than anything else, because Sicily, in case you didn't know, gets bloody hot. And do you know what the hottest month of the year is in Sicily? Yep, it's August. The month that saw the German withdrawal and evacuation. I cannot begin to imagine what it must have been like for those few German troops committed to fighting that rearguard action, but they did it. Oh, and everything that the Allies had to overcome in Sicily, they pretty much had to do all over again in Italy as well, except with less troops facing more Germans, because D-Day was approaching and a lot of the forces available for the assault on Sicily got taken away to train for the invasion of Normandy. Then even more of them got taken away for the little-known invasion of southern France after D-Day, Operation Dragoon, in August 1944. So yeah, fun times for everyone. We're now approaching Mount Etna, Sicily's active volcano, and oh boy is this thing active. Check out all of the craters on the sides. In places it kind of looks like a green surface of the moon. You can see where pyroclastic flows of hot magma and lava have ripped down the side of the mountain. This is a seriously angry mountain. And it's right next door to the city of Catania, which is the only place in Sicily that I've ever actually visited. And I love Catania. It's a great place. There's all kinds of Roman ruins there that you can see. But I can't make my mind up whether the Catanians, I suppose that's what you call them, are incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, because the city has been basically buried by lava from Mount Etna 17 times in recorded history. You think at some point they'd take the hint. The thing is, the presence of Mount Etna is kind of a blessing and a curse. I mean, a curse for obvious reasons. Buried by lava 17 times in recorded history. But all of that volcanic ash makes for incredibly fertile ground, which makes the region particularly suitable for growing wine. In the vicinity of the metropolitan area of Catania alone, there are something like 30 vineyards, and the wine from this place is outstanding. And it was on the, I think, 2 occasions when I visited Catania that a couple of notable incidents occurred during my naval career. My first visit to Catania was where I was introduced into the, I don't know if it's a Royal Naval tradition, but they call it the tequila suicide. Have you ever heard of the tequila slammer? This is where you take a shot of tequila, and in the web of your hand, between your thumb and your first finger, you put some salt. You have a wedge of lemon in the other hand. You lick the salt, knock back the shot, and then bite on the wedge of lemon. A tequila suicide is the same but different. The preparation's exactly the same. You have a shot of tequila, a dab of salt in the web of your hand, and a wedge of lime, or lemon. But in this case, you snort the salt up your nose, you down the shot of tequila, and then you squeeze the wedge of lemon into your eye. I never said it was clever, but it was kind of funny. The other notable Sicilian incident that occurred on my second visit to Catania was when I was on board HMS Newcastle. We'd stopped in Catania, but we were part of a NATO task force, and the task force commander was the captain of the German frigate who was there with us. There was more than just us in the German frigate, but he was the most senior commanding officer present, so he was the commander of the task force. On our second night, some genius thought it would be funny to go ashore, get very, very drunk, and then come back on board late at night, in the early hours of the morning, sneak into the paint locker, grab a couple of tins of bright red paint, take them up to the port waist and empty the contents of the tins all over the forecastle of the German frigate. Needless to say, the captain of the task force was not best pleased at what one of our arseholes had done to his shiny new frigate, and our captain was even less impressed, not least of which because he had to go over and apologise for it, and they never found out who was responsible. So we all had to pay for it. All leave was cancelled, which was particularly annoying for me because this was the second day in Catania and I'd been on duty the first day and hadn't been able to go ashore. Anyway, which was really bloody annoying because I'd been planning to pay a return visit to one of the most popular destinations in Catania, which isn't actually in Catania, but it's just a few miles down the road at Sigonella, which is an Italian Air Force base, although it's mostly used by the US Navy. Naval Air Station, Sigonella. I'd been there on my first visit to Catania, and it was amazing. It was the first time I'd ever been to a major US overseas base, and it did not disappoint. Trying to remember my way around. Remember, this was like 25, 30 years ago. So I think I'm just going to need to speed up the drone camera a little here. That's much better. So you can see Mount Etna in the distance, which means Catania is... no, not that way. Catania's the other way, isn't it? Let's get some altitude. Oh, that's the main gate down there. Yeah, so that's the main road. If that's Mount Etna, that means Catania is that way. And it's not much of a drive from Catania to Sigonella. You can tell straight away that you're in a US facility. It'll become apparent when you see. But that's the main gate. And getting driven through that gate in a bus was quite an eye-opener because on the outside of the gate, you're in Sicily. And on the inside of the gate, you're in the USA. All of the street signs, the road markings, absolutely everything is American. People are driving American cars around, the wives, the families, they were all there, driving their little American kids off to their little American school, all playing Little League baseball. Yep, they have their own baseball diamond. But it was the commissary and the Navy exchange at this place, which were the two reasons why we all wanted to visit, because it's got one of the biggest commissaries in any Navy overseas post in the world. Nearly 32,000 square feet of shopping mall and food court, and it was just bizarre. I mean, half an hour earlier, we were very definitely in Sicily. You know, Italian cars everywhere, Italian countryside, everybody speaking Italian, and then you drive in through the main gate of this place, step into the commissary, and it's as if you've just walked into a downtown shopping mall in any town USA. I mean, we're sitting there in the food court tucking into a burger and some fries, and school must have just finished, or cheerleading practice must have just finished, because a troop of schoolgirls in cheerleader outfits just suddenly wandered into the food court and started ordering burgers at Wendy's. It was utterly bizarre, but it was great fun. So, yeah, Sicily in general, and Catania in particular, and I suppose Sigonella in particular, but only if you have a NATO ID card. Fantastic places to visit. I regret that I only got to visit Catania twice, and on one of those occasions we weren't allowed to go ashore because some arsehole had decided to repaint the German frigate that we tied up next to. But it is what it is, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you're all having a great weekend, and if any of you have visited Sicily, or if any of you are from Sicily, then do let me know what your experience is like down below in the comments. I was very pleased to see so many people with such a positive response to the visit to Crete in the last video. Long may that continue. As always, folks, hope you've enjoyed today's video. Take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.